it's important for us to explore the role of crying over the Churban, the role of mourning. We've mentioned before, in other years, how the Rambam writes in Hilchos Evel, the Rambam writes in the Laws of Avelos at the end of the 12th chapter, that part of the process of an Avel is Yifchad v'Yidag. He should be afraid and he should worry, v'yafashvesh b'masa v'yasar b'tshuva. And he should explore his actions and he should do tshuva. The Peliyayetz writes that when it says in Shulchan Aruch, a person has to be meitzer v'dayeg, a person has to be in anguish and worry over the Churban. He says as being anguish, and anguish is about the past, and dayeg, to worry is to worry about the future. To worry about the future doesn't just mean to fret. To worry about the future means to try to make a better future. You know that Tisha B'Av is preceded by 3 weeks where we read haftorahs of puranos, of mourning, of pain, of anguish, of crying. And then it's followed by 7 weeks. 7 weeks where we read haftorahs of comfort, of coming back to Hashem. Which doesn't just mean comfort. Nechama doesn't just mean, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. It means that we have to come back to Hashem so that everything could be okay. And the last of those 7 weeks, as you know, is the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. Tisha B'Av starts the process of tshuva. It takes us to Rosh Hashanah, to the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, to the 10 days of tshuva. The crying is supposed to lead to something. But let's focus for now on the crying. Today's Thursday. What's the significance of that? When was Pesach this year? What day of the week? It's also Thursday. It's a feature of the Jewish calendar, Atbash Gardak. Right? The first day of Pesach is always the same day of the week as Tisha B'Av. It's a feature of the calendar, of the fixed calendar of the Jewish people. We note this feature, we commemorate this feature by having an egg, right? The hard-boiled egg that's on the Seder plate, the egg that we eat at the beginning of the meal to remember the Churban, reminds us that these korbanos that we remember on the Seder plate, the Pesach and the Chagiga, we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. And the link between Pesach and Tisha B'Av is thus made more sharp. And it's a significant link because you understand that when we left Mitzrayim to go to the Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, to the land flowing with milk and honey, to the land which Hashem had promised to our forefathers, to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's what we left for. We left to go there. You know, we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder. For the Arba L'Shainos, for the 4 terms of Geula, and you all know there are 5 terms, not just V'Otzeitzi, V'Yitzalti, V'Galti, V'Lakachti, I'll take out, I'll redeem, I'll save, I'll redeem, I'll take to Eretz Yisrael, but also Ve'Vesi Eschem L'Aretz, I'll bring you to the land, I'll bring you to Eretz Yisrael. But we don't drink that 4th cup. It sits in the middle of the table, the Kaishel Eliyahu. The whole Seder is around the story of Bikurim, people bringing their first fruits, thanking Hashem. Arami Oviravi, we came to Eretz Yisrael. The story of Tisha B'Av is the story of the interruption of that journey. Tisha B'Av is the break from Pesach. Now on Pesach, we know about a story of the sages who gathered around together to celebrate the Seder at a very difficult time. Maisa, there was a story with Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfo. They were Mesubim in Bnei Brak. They were there in Bnei Brak and they were telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim all that night. I know that many of you have heard, it's a classic word that many say, so why were they in Bnei Brak? Why were they with Rabbi Akiva in Bnei Brak? Rabbi Akiva was the junior member of the group. A person was supposed to go to their Rabbi on Yom Tov. Here they went to the student, they went to the Talmud. And many say beautifully that the story took place after Churban Beitar, after the damage, the destruction of Beitar, which was 70 years after the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, when hopes had sprung up again for the Jewish people for a rebirth, Bar Kochba, and they were dashed and destroyed. The Gemara's and Gittin's descriptions of the catastrophe of Beitar, the pictures which it draws of stacks of corpses, are reminiscent of the video images which we see, the grainy video images and pictures which we see of the liberators of the concentration camps and what they found there. They were a devastated people. So what will they do? How do you celebrate Pesach in that context? And the answer is you go to Rabbi Akiva for Pesach. Because there's another story, another famous story about Rabbi Akiva with many of those sages. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva were Mahalchim b'derech. The Gemara at the end of Maseches Makos tells the story about these four sages, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, and they were traveling. And they came to Har HaTzofim. First story. And they hear the roar of the stadiums of Rome. From 120 miles away. Maybe they were the stadiums of Rome. Maybe they were the stadiums that the Romans had built in the land. And they started to cry. They were hearing the celebration, right? The roar of the crowd. The Romans were celebrating and they were devastated. Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said, what are you doing? What are you laughing? And they said, why are you laughing? And he said, why are you crying? They said, look at these people. They're idol worshippers. They're secure. They're happy. They're gathered in their stadiums. They're celebrating. And we, the footstool of our God, the Beis Hamikdash, it's burned in the fire and we shouldn't weep. He said, that's why I'm laughing. If Hashem gives such joy to those who go against His will, imagine what He has in store for us. Another time they were going up to Yerushalayim and they got to Har HaTzofim, they got to Mount Scopus, from where you have the most beautiful view of the Rabbi, right? But it's a horrible view. It's a view of the wrong thing on the Rabbi. And then, before they had a different structure on the Rabbi, what they saw was a shul, sheyatzim, they saw a wild animal fox walking out of the Holy of Holies. And they started crying, except for Rabbi Akiva was laughing. Why are you laughing? Why are you crying? The Beis Hamikdash, the Kohen Gadol could only go into the Holy of Holies once a year. None of us could ever go into that part of the building. And now wild animals are roaming around there, and we shouldn't cry. So that's why I'm laughing. I will have testified my faithful witnesses, Uriah and Zechariah. My Indian Uriah and Zechariah, they don't correlate, they're not contemporary. Uriah b'mikdash Rishon and Zechariah b'mikdash Sheni. Uriah was in the first place of Mikdash. Zechariah was the last of the Nevi'im of the beginning of the second base of Mikdash. Elatola Pasuk and Vosei Shel Zechariah and Vosei Shel Uriah. The pasuk is linking their prophecies together. Regarding Uriah, it says, "Lachem diglalchem Tzion sadatech techoresh." On your account, Tzion will be plowed up like a field. The building will be destroyed. Foxes will roam. I see it. And you know what else I see? I see Zechariah. Yet, old men and older women will sit in the streets of Yerushalayim. And the streets of the city will be filled with beloveds, boys and girls playing. Until I saw the prophecy of Uriah fulfilled, I didn't know we'd ever see the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah. But then now I see Hashem keeps His word. The hard stuff comes. The good stuff will come. The Lashon has said, in this word they said, these words they said, Akiva nichamtav, Akiva nichamtav. Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you comforted us. So they said, beautiful. That's where they went for Pesach. To celebrate Geula, freedom, when there was darkness. To celebrate miracles, when they didn't see any. They had to go to Rabbi Akiva, who reminded them that all of the tzoros, all of the difficulties that came, that were expected, in a sense, to come, should also give us expectations about the good things, coming. So they went in for Pesach. Because Rabbi Akiva left. And I have a question. Where'd they go for Tisha B'Av? Did they go to Rabbi Akiva for Tisha B'Av? What did Rabbi Akiva do on Tisha B'Av? Akiva always laughed. He didn't just laugh here. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin that Rabbi Akiva once went to visit with the same group. Shechol Rabbi Eliezer nichnasu talmidav levakroi. His students came in to visit him. Arba Zakenim, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, they all came in to visit him. Same group. They were all crying. Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They all told Rabbi Eliezer about, he had been so valuable to them in the past. And Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Eliezer, suffering is a wonderful thing. Chavivim Yisrael. Suffering is precious. And Rabbi Eliezer sat up. He said, prop me up in bed. I want to hear what Rabbi Akiva has to say. And you think it's only somebody else's tzoros, Rabbi Eliezer's problems. You think it's only Klal Yisrael's problems. In Chazal, it says that when they killed Rabbi Akiva, right? Remember the death of Rabbi Akiva, we're going to be reading this Kina shortly. Arzei Halvanai. Rabbi Akiva was reading Shema. In one of the versions of Chazal, it says, Mochich. He was laughing, he was smiling. He was saying, I get to be Meiser Nefesh. It wasn't just somebody else's difficulties that he left. So what did Rabbi Akiva do on Tisha B'Av? And we need to understand it, because if there was a Rabbi Akiva in our generation, not in our generation so much, but there was a Rabbi Akiva in our century, it was the Panvizh Rav, who, ironically, was the builder of the Bnei which has a big street, Rabbi Akiva, Bnei also has a street for Panvizh Rav. So when do they cry? When did Rabbi Akiva cry? There's one story about Rabbi Akiva crying like crazy. Not just crying, pulling his hair out in distress. I think it's Rabbi Akiva's Tisha B'Av. It wasn't Tisha B'Av, but it's around this story of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos was one of the great Tanoim. His story, interestingly, is similar to a story of Rabbi Akiva's own life, but both of them were Balei Tshuva. Both of them started to learn Torah very late in their lives. Both of them became greats in the Jewish people. Eliezer ben Hurkos was earlier. He was a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who, as you know, was right at the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the one who interacted with Aspasianus, right, the boss of Titus. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos was his student, and Rabbi Akiva was Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos' student. One of the students of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos. A student really of the students of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos, but a student of his as well. They both started to learn late in life. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkos, there are many things about him, but one of the things was, that he was the one in that famous story where he had an argument with the Chachamim, and he said, if I'm right, so the tree should prove it, and the tree lifted up from the ground. If I'm right, the river should prove it, and the river changed course. If I'm right, the walls of the base medrash. The heavenly voice came out and said, and as a result of that story, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus was considered by his contemporaries to be too aggressive in pursuing the halacha being like him, not using proper methods, and they put him in cherem. They distanced themselves from him. And for many years, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus was shamute. He was beshamt. He was distant, and people didn't learn from him. And I just read to you parts of two stories about when they came to see him when he was dying. They came to see him when he was dying. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus wasn't so thrilled. Lama Ba said, why did you come? A different Gemara in Sanhedrin. We came to learn Torah. Where have you been? Why till now didn't you come? We didn't have the ability to. We didn't have the time. He said, I'll be shocked if they'll die their own death. If they'll die naturally. Asar Ramos, predicted by Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus. Rabbi Akiva said, how about me? You'll have the worst death of them all. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus took his two arms and he put them on his heart. And he said, my two arms are like two sifrei Torah sheniglalu, like two rolled up sifrei Torah. Somehow we imagine this like our sifrei Torah, the two sides of the sefer Torah. Harbe Torah lomadati, harbe Torah limadati. I learned a lot of Torah. I taught a lot of Torah. Harbe Torah lomadati b'leichasarti b'Rabbi se'afilu kikelev amlaki. With all the Torah that I learned, I didn't take from my teachers as much as a dog laps up from the sea when it goes to take a drink from the sea. I taught a lot of Torah, first my students took from me like an applicator dips into a tube, for the ointment or for the makeup, what it comes out with. And he goes on and he speaks about all the halachas, all the Torah, the vastness of Torah, that he didn't ever convey to them because they didn't show up. They never learned it from them because they didn't show up. They engaged him in learning, and he taught them halachas. And then he told them of Psak Tohar, the Yotza Nishmasei B'Tara, soul left Psak Tohar, about something that was pure, a certain shu, a certain shalach, shaila. Amad Rabbi Yeshua al-Raglav, Amar Hutar HaNeder, Rabbi Yeshua stood up and he said, the vow, the excommunication is now expired, it's done. We can now embrace Rabbi Eliezer. Motzei Shabbos Poga by Rabbi Akiva min Kesari Lalud. Motzei Shabbos Rabbi Akiva encountered them. He was bagging his flesh till he was bleeding. They said on him in the shura, in the row, after the shura is after the burial. Our father, Rechev Yisrael Parasha, the chariot of Kal Yisrael and its rider. Remember, that's what Elisha said about Eliyahu Hanavi. I have a lot of coins and I have no banker to take it to change it, to make me able to do something with it. From the Zohar HaKadosh, Parshas Vayera, it tells this story with other embellishments. The Rabbi Akiva cried and he said, Rabbi, Rabbi, teach me Torah. Have Einay de Rabbi Akiva Nachsin Maya. Rivers were flowing from the eyes of Rabbi Akiva. Kichayla Sa'avon. Shir Hashirim he learned with him. The secrets of Shir Hashirim. In Shir Hashirim it says, Chayla Sa'avon. I'm lovesick. Lovesick over the Rabbeinu Shalom. Lovesick over his tire. Akiva couldn't take it. He raised his voice, he wept. Vai Rabbi, Ishtar Alma Yostra. Woe our teacher. The world is left orphaned from you. That's when Rabbi Akiva cried. When he realized the lost opportunities that he wasn't going to get back. He didn't cry about the future. People cried, they thought it was over. Akiva didn't cry. It was never over. You're alive, you could do more. But when something slipped through his fingers, the mu'uvas shalayuchal iskai, the missing which can't be fixed, which can't be replaced. You know what the Gemara says? What happens if a person misses Kriyat Shema? One evening, misses Kriyat Shema one morning. Can never make it up. You never make it up. You can say Kriyat Shema 400 times the next day. You still miss saying Kriyat Shema that time. There are some things that we can never make up. And we could cry over those things. We must cry over those things. We must cry over those empty spaces. Does that mean that you're just sitting there, weeping? No. You don't sit there weeping. The weeping drives you to not miss another minute, not miss another Kriyat Shema, not neglect to take advantage of the Rebbe that's still there. Move forward. Rabbi Akiva laughed. He laughed on Pesach. He laughed as he stood by the Rabbi as he saw there's going to be a wonderful future. Nothing about what we're missing says that there can't be the greatest future in the world. Wake up. Rabbi Akiva famously awakened his Talmidim. A beautiful medrash that says that Rabbi Akiva was teaching and his students were sleeping. Right? So what does that mean? He was starting the great rabbinic tradition. Rabbi Akiva his students were sleeping. His students said, look what we're living in. What kind of a world this is. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. We're irrelevant. Nothing matters. They were asleep, and he woke them up. He said, right, the medrash, we're not going to speak just very, very quickly about the medrash. He woke them up and he said that Esther, who's the granddaughter of Sarah, who lived 127 years, came and she ruled over 127 Medinas, 127 countries. And they woke up. Wow. Right? I don't know. In my rabbinical school, they taught us that if everybody's falling asleep, you tell a joke. Like, what do you tell a funny story? What's this? He told them this thing, 127. So we always explain that Sarah and Esther had very similar lives and very different lives. Sarah was beautiful. The king wanted her. The king took her against her will. Esther was beautiful. The king wanted her. The king took her against her will. Same, right? Except there was a different ending to the story. Sarah, that night, Hashem brought miracles. And Sarah got sent away with Paro, sending them off with great wealth. She wasn't touched. Esther lived in the house of Achashverosh till the end of her life. She was married to that Menuval. She had a child with that Menuval. Kasher avadati, on Purim, we invoke Tisha B'Av. when we say those three words, when Esther says, V'chasher avaditi, avaditi, we switch from the Megillas Esther to the bouncy Megillas Esther to the dirge. Same story. Said Rabbi Akiva, it's the same story. You know that Esther built the second Beis Hamikdash? You know that child that Esther had with that Menuvel, Daryavish? Hashem, he built the second Beis Hamikdash? You know that Esther, there in the palace, she saved the Jewish people. Hashem was with Esther like he was with Sarah. Sometimes it's with fireworks and makos and great things. And sometimes it's a tragic story. But Hashem is still there, and so his Talmidim woke up. His Talmidim woke up. The Panavish Rav, famously, one of his most famous lines everybody knows, he said it to Rav Herzog. I think he said it to many others. Rav Herzog was the Rav Arashi, the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, the first chief rabbi of when Eretz Yisrael became a state, in the Panavish Rav's time. And the Panavish Rav talked to him, worked with him, and talked to him about his plans to build Torah. And Rav Herzog said, you're dreaming. You're dreaming. And the Panavish Rav said, it's true, I'm dreaming. He says, but the difference between me and others is that when I dream, I'm awake. I don't dream in my sleep. When I dream, I'm awake. Panavish Rav, his people around him knew he would wake up in the morning and he would say, quick, quick. He would give them the ideas, the new plans, which ran through his head during the night. Reams of ideas. You cry on Tisha B'Av because if you don't stop to realize what you lost, you're never driven to go forward for the future. Rabbi Akiva, he cried, he pulled out his hair over Rabbi Eliezer. And one thing is for sure, he washed off those tear-stained cheeks. And he was on fire. He was now ready to go. He was never going to lose an opportunity again if he could help it. And so you have to cry. Rabbi Akiva cried on Tisha B'Av. Because when you cry and you realize what Titus did in the Beis Hamikdash, when you cry and you realize that Hashem is home in this world, that we haven't made a home for him in this world, when you cry and you realize how many Jews were destroyed, killed, and tortured, how much Torah was ripped out of the world, and you stop for a minute, and you cry and you realize the loss, the holes that will never be able to be made up. You have a chance to then be motivated and driven to build. I read an interview that somebody did with the Panavish Rav. He asked him about his marvelous success in the yeshiva and what he had built. And the Panavish Rav looked at him like with upset. He says, we're going to take pride in our successes. Every success makes me afraid because it shows me what could be accomplished. If I succeeded, then you can accomplish something. Then you have to do more. Responsibility is very heavy. We can bring Klal Yisrael back to the Torah. Successes, we have so much to do. Gewalt, we act lazy. And the Panavish Rav told him about a wonderful guests that he had at his home from the yeshiva for Einik Shabbos. And he said it wasn't Chaimke. One of the star Talmidim of Panavish was Rav Chaimke Berman. Became a Rosh Hashiva in Panavish. He was a goy, a masmid, an accomplished learner. He says it wasn't Chaimke. There were two American boys in Panavish. One had been there for a year and a half, and one had been there for 6 months. The one who had been there for 6 months, had come upon Panavision, some trip he had taken in Eretz Yisrael, it's happened even then, was intoxicated by the sound of Torah. And his parents, his mother agreed that he could come to learn in the yeshiva. 6 months he'd been in the yeshiva, he says, and he knows how, he learned with me tonight, at Einik Shabbos. He learned a Gemara, a Rashi, a Tosfos. The one who's here a year and a half. Whoa, what he's accomplishing and learning. These are the neshamas of the Jewish people, the souls of the Jewish people. The power of Torah is hidden in the heart of every Jew. All it needs is a small push, a readiness, a sign of awakening, and the pure Jewish soul is revealed for all to see. If that's the case, what are we doing about it? What are we involved with? How are we fulfilling our obligations? There are winds of tshuva coursing through the Jewish world, and we're silent. This is early 60s, this interview, before 67, before people started talking about the winds of tshuva coursing through the world. Those were the tears of the Panavision Rav. The tears of what could be accomplished. He cried over his community. Panavision Rav built a world. He was a Rav in a town called Vij in Lithuania. He came there. His instruction from the Chafetz Chaim, his Rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim, who saw his immense potential. He said, wherever you're a Rav, you have to make a yeshiva. And he made a yeshiva in Vij. And then the First World War came along and destroyed his city and destroyed his yeshiva. And after the First World War, shortly after the First World War, he was invited to become the Rav in Ponyevish, which was one of the 3 big cities in Lithuania. And I think the second biggest city after Kovna in Lithuania, Jewish city. And in Ponyevish, he took what was the famous small kibbutz of the Ponyevisher, of the previous Rabbi Ponyevisher. He had a small group of geniuses that he cultivated and learned. He made a yeshiva of hundreds. He built a high school, what we would call a yeshiva ketana. He built a day school. He built a Beis Yaakov. He built an orphanage. He built a hospital. He built in Ponyevish, in Lithuania. He ran to raise money to build and to build and to build in Ponyevish. And then the Second World War was coming. And in 1940, Lithuania was between Germany and Russia. Famous moment, we've talked about it many times, you all know about it. It's the time when the Mir Yeshiva and other yeshivas came to Vilna. And the Panavision Rav, who was a magnificent person, he was a leader extraordinaire. He also occupied one of the Jewish seats in the Sejm, in the Lithuanian parliament. And he was sent together with the Kovna Rav, Rav Avram Dovber Kana Shapira, the Rav of Kovna. The 2 of them were sent by the Lithuanian government to find a solution for the Jews. They knew it was a matter of time. They sent them to America. They had diplomatic passports to go to America to try to gain entry permits for 5,000 Jews to come to America. And they traveled together, the Kovna Rav and the Panavision Rav, the Dvar Avram, Avram Dover Kana Shapira, the Panavision Rav. They traveled together through Germany, through Austria, down south to Italy, where they were going to go from Trieste. They were going to go to travel. And the Kovner Rav became ill. And he couldn't make the trip. And he went back to Kovner. He died in Kovner. And the Panovich Rav was there, and he had to make a decision. He felt that he knew what was happening in America. He knew that America had slammed the door. He felt it was a futile mission. And he felt he had a better chance in Eretz Yisrael. Had a better chance in Eretz Yisrael. It was 2 weeks before Pesach, a couple weeks before Pesach, and he traveled to Eretz Yisrael. Happens that he had a brother who lived in Eretz Yisrael. His mother was in Eretz Yisrael. His mother lived in Tel Aviv at that time. And he traveled to Eretz Yisrael. He had a son in Eretz Yisrael. And he had as we'll discuss later, he also had a mandate from Chafetz Chaim that the future would be in Eretz Yisrael. And he called his wife from Italy, spoke to her, discussed it with her. She told him that he should go to Eretz Yisrael. And he left Eretz Yisrael. And then the Nazi noose tightened around Lithuania. He was never able to go back. And his city was destroyed. His 1,000 students were destroyed. His wife and 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter that were left there in Lithuania were destroyed. Everything was destroyed. And the Panovich Rav lived with the fact that he said, I'm like Noach. I saved myself, but I didn't save my generation. Right, there's a famous medrash which speaks about Noach versus Moshe Rabbeinu. How when Hashem was upset with the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu said, if you don't save them, don't save me. And he managed to save not only himself, but the entire Jewish people. Noach only saved himself. Only saved himself. And that's why they're called the waters of Noach. He was haunted by this. He was haunted by what he didn't do. He was haunted by what he had left. But he was driven to rebuild it. So the story, one of the famous stories of the Panovich Rav, and it's worthy of being such a story. It's the story with which we entitled today's discussion, Rebuilding a Destroyed World, Hazayrim Bedima Barina Yitzayru, those who plant with tears, harvest with joy. Panovich Rav was there in Eretz Yisrael, working still, papers. He thought everybody was alive. To some degree they were. And he met a man who was a big businessman in Eretz Yisrael at that time, who owned real estate in Bnei Brak, which was nothing. Bnei Brak was a hamlet. His name was Rabbi Hauer. If you're in Eretz Yisrael, you see a lot of stores that sell eyeglasses. Hauer. That's part of his empire. And Rabbi Hauer, he came to Rabbi Hauer for help. He had to go to Beirut to get some papers, to try to get certificates for his family, whatever, long story. And he comes out of Rabbi Hauer's house, and he looks out at the hill, which is the hill atop which the Panovich Yeshiva sits today. And it was an empty hill. And the Panovich Rav said this would be a perfect place to build the yeshiva. And Halpern owned the real estate. And he said, if you'll build a yeshiva there, I'll give it to you for a song. And he sold it to him for a very small amount of money. And Panovich Rav committed then and there to build a yeshiva for Panovich that was still alive. He was building a yeshiva. He was in a rush to build it because he needed a place to bring everybody. He got a postcard in the middle of this time from his brother-in-law, of Asher Kalman Baron Hashem Yikom Damo, who was a partner of his Tat in the yeshiva, and he sent him a postcard with code The factory is functioning at full capacity. Which he understood. The yeshiva, they were, with all the tzaras, they were going strong. It heartened him so much. And so he went and he said, we're going to pour the foundation of the yeshiva. He had nothing, he had no money, he had the piece of land. And one afternoon was his own birthday. Tammuz, Tafshin Aleph. He got together. Chazanish, 28th of Iyar. His 55th birthday. He got together to start his life again. All that day he was fasting. All that day he was crying. And he asked a few people to come with him. Chazanish, Rav Yaakov Landa, who was the Rav of Bnei Brak. His descendants are still Rabbanim in Bnei Brak. They had a couple of boards. He had some seltzer and cookies. Nobody ate it. Panovich Rav, the story is told, cried so copiously that they didn't need to mix water into the sand. Just his tears. They said, Tilim, Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahanim, the Panovich Rav bent down, poured the first cup of cement for the cornerstone of Panovich in Eretz Yisrael, all shaking, wailing. Chazanish said to the Panovich Rav, this yeshiva is going to flourish. Because Hazorim Bedima Barina Yitzayr. People who plant with tears will harvest with joy. There's a famous Messiah, famous tradition. One of the great Gedalim, I think, asked Rav Chaim Volozhiner, how is it that he built a yeshiva and the yeshiva flourished, became the mother of all yeshivas, the Volozhiner yeshiva. And when he built the yeshiva, the base of Ephraim, of Ephraim Zalman Margolis, it didn't go anywhere. And Rav Chaim Volozhiner said, so what did you do when you founded the yeshiva? Well, tell me how you celebrated it. He said, on that day we didn't say Tachman and Brody. It was a day of festivity, a day of celebration. There was music. There was a parade. Chaim Volozhiner said, on the day that I founded Volozhin, we fasted and we said Slichas. Hazorim Bedima Barina Yitzayr. You can't just laugh. If Rabbi Akiva just laughed, he wouldn't have been Rabbi Akiva. It was because Rabbi Akiva cried and laughed. That's why we had Rabbi Akiva. Bacha Rabbi ba'amar, yesh kaina ilamai b'sha'achas. Rabbi cried and said, a person can gain the Olam Haba in 1 minute. Right? Remember, we're about to read the story of the Asar Arugei Malchus. Of Chanina ben Tradian was burning. Right? And the king had placed, Caesar had placed cotton on his heart to postpone his passing, so that it would take a long time for him to die, so he'd be tortured. He says, if I take it away, well, what will be? You'll go to Olam Haba. Yesh kaina ilamai v'shachas. In 1 minute, you can have Olam Haba. Ask the Chafetz Chaim. Cry? Fantastic. Get rich quick. Somebody tells you you can make $1 million in a minute. You cry or you laugh. You rejoice, you dance. He cried and he said, a person can be kind of loving v'shachas. He says, yeah. Because you realize we could do every minute. Not just get in. Oh, I could do something great in a minute, get a tell. Every minute I could do something which is mamish kaina elam haba. Every moment I could do something which is kaina elam haba. How can you give up a minute? That's why Rabbi Akiva was crying his eyes out about the death of Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. What I missed. What I could have had, b'sha'achas. One of the great Rosh Yeshiva, the first great Rosh Yeshiva here, just such a rich life, such an amazing life. So the Panovich Rav did this in 1941. The building didn't go anywhere quickly. Then he was diagnosed in 42 or 43 with throat cancer. He lost his voice. He was diagnosed with throat cancer, and he was told that he had less than a year to live. He said, I can't wait. So he called Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, who was a young Talmid Chacham. Shmuel Rozovsky was for 50 years, I believe. Maybe 40, 50 years, he was a Rosh Yeshiva Panovich, a Shiurim. I studied to this day. I remember when I was in Yeshiva, I still have it somewhere in my house. The handwritten notes from Rav Shmuel Shir were photocopied. Somebody had very good handwriting and wrote them were photocopied and bound together. We had them. I have it on the Sefes Kiddushin. Before now, they published this beautiful svarim. He told Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, gather together. We have to start the yeshiva. You're the Maggid Shir. You're the Rosh Yeshiva. And he got together 7 Talmidim in a base medrash in Bnei Brak. And the Panovich, he said he was dying. He had to make sure that it happened. So Rav Shmuel Rozovsky said a hesped, a eulogy on the Panovich Rav. Spoke about Noach. It's a beautiful, beautiful hesped. But he said something on a pasuk in Tehillim, Ki hashosois yeharesun tzadik ma po'al. When the foundations are crumbling, tzadik ma po'al, righteous one, what did he do? And some read this as a question on the Rabbi Shalom, what are you doing? The world is crumbling. Said Rab Shmuel, no, when the world is crumbling, the tzaddik says, what can I do? What can I do to stop it from crumbling? What can I do to make it right? He says, that was our Rebbe, that was the Panovich Rav. The world was crumbling. And he just asked himself what he could do. His student, Rabbi Yaakov Edelstein, who was a magnificent personality, a Rav in Ramat HaSharon, his brother, Rav Gershon Edelstein, is today still a Rosh Yeshiva in Panovich. I think he's 100 years old. Still says Shir. He said, the Panovich Rav, when he had to climb the hill, you know, you always have to climb hills. He had to climb the hill to the base medrash. Sometimes he was older and he was winded. He would go to the base medrash to give a shir. He would pause and he would reach into his pocket, pull out his wallet, and pull out a picture. He would look at the picture, put back the wallet into his pocket, and keep walking. It was a picture of his children who were killed in the Holocaust. His wife and his children were killed in the Holocaust. Carried around with him. And whenever he felt a little weak, he looked at the picture. Some people would look at the picture and collapse in a heap. He looked at the picture and he said, gotta do. What was destroyed, I have to do. That was the Panovich Rav. There's tons more to say. We'll say more on other things. I want to just, there are a couple of things that we have to say before we go on. To say 2 kinos. One, B'tzeisi Mitzrayim, and the other one, Arzei Halvanai. So we cry over lost opportunity. I want to show you how real this is for Tisha B'Av. Because the origin of Tisha B'Av is in the sin of the Meraglim, right? The sin of the spies. We said we didn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. It was attractive, it was there, it was ready for us. We said, we don't want to go. We were crying that we didn't want to go. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, this will be the time for generations when you're going to cry because you can't go. Then you could go. You cried over going. You're going to cry for generations, a bechil l'dairis, that you wish you could go. So what happened on Tisha B'Av? So Hashem made a decree, made a gzeira. And what was the gzeira? That the Jewish people would be in the desert for 40 years. And the next generation would go. And what were those 40 years? What happened during those 40 years? Okay, 38 years. What happened during those 38 years? You know what happened? Nothing. Nothing. How do I know nothing happened? Because in the Torah, it doesn't say anything. Well, what happened? The Torah ends, right? You have Shlach, Korach, right? All of the first year. And then it jumps ahead in Parshas Chukas, right away to the death of Miriam, to the end of time. We have no stories told to us after the story of Korach, which happened, as most understand, the Machlekes Rishonim, but right after the Meraglim, because there was some disillusionment with Moshe Rabbeinu, because the Ramban says, amazing thing, says Korach always wanted to attack Moshe Rabbeinu. But until Hashem had decreed that we wouldn't go into Eretz Yisrael, nobody would have taken it. When Hashem agreed, so then Moshe, his opinion poll numbers went down, his approval numbers went down, and Korach was able to attack it. But then it skips, because nothing happened of impact. You know what those years were? They were, what is it called in football, playing down the clock? Just waiting for the last minutes to go. Hold the ball. Don't do anything. It wasn't by choice. Hashem said, you guys aren't going anyplace. We're just going to wait. Could you imagine? I mean, in a sense, it was unbelievable. They were in the midbar. They were eating the man. They were in the presence of Hashem. But Hashem was saying to them, nothing is going to come of you. I'm just waiting for your children, next generation. Nothing. That's what you cry over. Tisha B'Av, we cry over wasted time, lost opportunities, wasted generations. And that motivates us to move. Panav Rav said a word, beautiful, beautiful word. Avram Zokein Baba Yomim. Avram was old, coming with days. What does it mean, coming with days? Said the Panav Rav. And there are many interpretations of it, but his interpretation is priceless. He says, when people are young, they think about what they're going to do the next year, and the next year, and the next year. And, there's also an expression, wait till next year, and they make plans. He says, when a person's old, they know, what's the expression, right? They don't buy green bananas, right? When they're old, they say, what am I going to do today? Avram Zokein, he was old, Baba Yomim. He thought about every single day, what I'm going to do. I don't want to miss an opportunity. Tisha B'Av's last opportunity, for that we cry. Plenty to make up. All these years of Hashem's Migdash and ruins, all of that homelessness of the Rabbi. So you have a lot to think about when you say Dasar Ruge Malchus from this story. But where it came from those people, Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkana said, you won't die now. You'll be the Ruge Malchus. Last opportunity. Rabbi Akiva, worst of them all. Think about Rav Chanina ben Tradion. You think about Rav Chanina ben Tradion and the image which the Panav Rav said over and over again. Remember Rav Chanina ben Tradion? He was the one that they wrapped him in a Sefer Torah, and they burned the Sefer Torah. And they said to Rav Chanina ben Tradion, what do you see? And Rav Chanina ben Tradion said, I see parchas. I see the letters flying. The gvilim are nisrafim, just the parchment is being burnt. And he said, I'm okay. Because if it was just me that they were burning, okay, but they're burning the Torah. I know that the Torah will be back. And if I'm being burnt along with the Torah, that means I'll be back too. The one who's Taveya, the one who makes sure that the Torah will return, will make sure I'll be back as well. The Rav used to say in his inimitable fashion, he says, so those letters, the Romans were destroying, they were burning Rav Chanina ben Tradion, and those letters floated off of the gvil, they floated off of the parchment, and they fly through the air. And what's our job? We have to get another parchment. We have to put it down in a safe place so that the letters can come back down and fill that parchment. And he said, that's my job. That's our job. The Torah was burned. The letters are flying. We have to find a place to put it down. When the Ponevezh Rav traveled by train on his last journey from Ponevezh, so he said, they traveled through Germany. They traveled through Austria. And when they crossed over occupied Austria into Italy, people on the train started screaming, Frei, frei, free, free, we're free. 2 weeks before Pesach. And the Ponevezh Rav said, Ay, b'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim, b'tzeisi mi Yerushalayim. When I left Egypt, when I left Yerushalayim. He was going to Yerushalayim. But he didn't know what to feel. He was leaving Mitzrayim. He was leaving Hitler. He was leaving the Nazis. He was leaving a Europe which was going up in flames. But he was leaving the place of Torah. What was then the place of Torah? The home of Torah. Now the Gemara says Bavel had a little bit of a halacha of Eretz Yisrael because of the places of Torah. He was leaving to a place where it was just beginning. Now Eretz Yisrael has both claims. It's Eretz Yisrael and it's the land of Torah. To a large part, to the credit of the Ponevezh Rav. So we're going to say two kinos now. One of them is callback. It's a refrain where we speak about the magnificence of what happened when we left Mitzrayim and the horror of what happened when we left Yerushalayim. Back and forth. And then right afterwards, we'll say the kina of the Asar Harugei Malchus, of the 10 martyrs. B'tzeisi mi Mitzrayim is on page 58, 59. It's a kina number 31, Lamed Aleph in your books.